The key features of Cyrene were temples dedicated to gods, Apollo, Demeter, and Zeus, alongside Ptolemaic gods such as Isis and Serapis. A large agora defined the city's center, and on the western edge, the famed Acropolis was built. A fortification wall was added around the harbor at the end of the 2nd century CE. As the city grew, more buildings were constructed beyond the walls. Under Roman influence, Cyrene became an economic powerhouse, rising in status throughout the Mediterranean. Cyrene's school of medicine rivaled all others except for that of the Greek city Kos. Some of the great minds in ancient math, astronomy, and geography were born or established in the various schools of the city, which included an institute of philosophy founded by Aristippus, a pupil of Socrates. From 115 to 117 CE, there was a revolt in the Jewish quarter that greatly damaged the city of Cyrene. Over time, a succession of battles, poor management of its silphium crop, and earthquakes eventually took their toll on the city. It was completely abandoned in 365 CE. The nearby port of Apollonia was an ideal location, with its natural cove, sheltered by 2 islands and rocky inlets. Along with a lighthouse, the port was later equipped with quays and warehouses to accommodate the increased shipping traffic. With its success as a commercial trading port, Apollonia surpassed Cyrene to eventually become the capital of the Pentapolis. A number of earthquakes gradually shifted the city, causing many of its original structures to sink. Some of its ruins can still be seen underwater. Welcome to Important Monuments of Cyrene. The sanctuary of Apollo sits on a prominent edge of the plateau of Cyrene, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. It could be accessed either by the road from Apollonia via the necropolis or by the sacred way coming from the agora of the city. The abundance of temples and statues throughout the city reflect the various Greco-Roman and Egyptian cult influences over the centuries. Temples dedicated to Apollo, Cyrene, and Zeus stood alongside those of Ptolemaic gods, such as Serapis and Isis. Numerous fountains were decorated to represent other gods, including the city's namesake, Cyrene.
Ό,τι ωφελίες, ευχέρες, εφέσεστε. Ου κόποπας παρά του ιδίου, ίσως αλμολίδιο κατασχέθηση. Μεγίστη χάρη δόκηση,
A vestibule known as a propylaeum marked its entrance and highlighted the fountain of Apollo. God of the sun and of protection, Apollo was an important deity to both Greeks and Romans. The sanctuary built in his honor was considered to be sacred. The imposing temple was built on a natural cornice, stretching more than 200 meters in length and roughly 50 meters in width, and was surrounded by a vast Doric colonnade. Sections uncovered by archaeologists indicate restorations to the columns were made between 115 and 116 CE. The altar was located in front of the temple. Both are estimated to be the same age, though restored at different times. Many bulls were sacrificed each year at the altar in honor of Apollo. The imprint in the stone of the ring used to strap the animals down is visible to this day. Carved during the Roman era, the Apollo Cytharide was discovered near the temple. It is considered an important archaeological find. The statue of Apollo was in pieces when it was uncovered. Remarkably, most fragments were found, and the restored statue is currently at the British Museum. The team extrapolated the statue's final look based on the current partial reconstruction and placed it inside the temple to reflect the patron deity of the area. The amphitheater of Cyrene is located on what is known as the Terrace of Myrtosa, next to the sanctuary of Apollo. It was built on top of the old theater in the 2nd century. Originally used as a stage, the theater became an amphitheater once the taste for Roman gladiatorial entertainment reached the city.
Here.
Entrances were placed at both ends of the amphitheater. A wall replaced the first 2 rows of bleachers as protection from the array of wild animals in the ring. The tunnel used for the parade of beasts and gladiators circled the arena, unlike the Roman Colosseum's tunnel, which was beneath the amphitheater. The basement and corridors accommodated both the gladiators and the animals, and included lifts that raised the traps into the arena's center. Since the original theater was close to the cliffside, the expansion didn't allow for a perfect circle. Instead, junctions of the semicircle formed the arena into an oval shape. This elliptical formation still ensured an excellent view from all angles. The team decided to create a perfectly round theater for technical reasons, and used the structure of the Roman theater as their reference.
Welcome to the Temple of Zeus in Cyrene.
Θάνατοι θεοί, φυλάτους είναι εμάς, επειδή θεραπεύουν με αυτές θυσίες και άρες αναθήμες. Τι κούπερ.
Χαίρον των θεών ευμένεια, αγαπήνθησθε.
Μου απολαμβάνηση, γίζωνα χαιρέστε ευχή.
Φεύγουν συμφορά.
Ωφελία μη μέγιστην εκδόσες, χάριν είδενε.
Ευτυχώς επέρασεν η θύελα.
Δόξα της θεής, δεν τέλεστε επιτέλους.
Δόξασι ο Θεός ημών, δόξασι.
Μη Κοίτα κακή, έφυγε με.
Μεγίστη χάρη δόκηση, Εφράτη.
Χάρη στο σημείτα σου. Ευλογείτε σε, Θεή. Facing east towards the rising sun stands the temple dedicated to the cult of Zeus. It was built sometime in the 5th century BCE. 70 meters long with 46 Doric-style columns, the imposing structure was the largest Greek temple erected in Africa. It was only slightly larger than the Parthenon and the Temple of Zeus in Olympia. The exterior was designed with the decorative elements common to Doric architecture. The dimensions of the columns were different, giving visitors an impression of uniqueness when viewing each facade. After the temple was destroyed during the Jewish rebellion, Emperor Hadrian had it reconstructed. He chose not to rebuild the outer portico, but did restore the new Corinthian columns in marble. The temple was later completed under Marcus Aurelius. In the time of Augustus, a faithful but smaller imitation of the Olympian Zeus was used to be worshipped. Hadrian then installed a new 12-meter-high statue matching the Zeus in Olympia. It was made of chiseled marble with the head, arms, and feet carved in the round. Archaeologists confirmed that there was a monumental statue of Zeus in this temple, though experts remain divided on whether it was one of Zeus or one more specific to the cult of Zeus Ammon. The team elected to place a statue of Zeus Ammon in this location, knowing that Cyrene was central to the spread of this cult in the Greek Mediterranean area.
Welcome to the Gladiator Arena. While gladiators would not perform in Cyrene until later in the Roman era, the team decided to include a gladiatorial arena for two reasons. First, they believed it was important to portray this aspect of Roman life. And second, they felt it would add interesting gameplay possibilities. The first gladiators to enter the arena were prisoners of war. It was a spectacle of violent clashes between men and against wild beasts, that lasted nearly 1,000 years. Eventually, volunteers began to enter the ring. For status and money, many of the more skilled combatants increased the quality of the entertainment. Thus, the profession of gladiator came to be. Bound by contract to the master of the gladiators, the fighters were fed, trained, and guarded in barracks. Gladiators were separated into heavy and light armored fighters, each with their own set of specific armor and weapons. Organizers often had two audience-favored factions face each other in combat. The events were highly organized. Fights were held with a background of music and supervised by a referee. Death, either in the course of combat or by decision, was not always the only way out for the loser. Several were released due to their performance and gained great notoriety as celebrities.
Welcome to the Agora and Thermal Baths. Cyrene's Agora was the public marketplace and political hub of the city. Its central courtyard was open to the sky, while market stalls and shops ran along the sides, some neatly tucked away under long-roofed colonnades. As in other Greek cities, the Agora included a central hearth, known as a prytaneum. This place served as Cyrene's official embassy where guests were welcomed to the city. An unnamed statue representing naval victories was the centerpiece of the Agora. The statue's female figure likely represents Nike, the goddess of victory. It was likely very similar to the victory of Samothrace, which currently resides in the Louvre Museum and served as a reference for the team. The Cyrene Agora also displayed many temples and monuments, celebrating its founding king, Batos, and the city gods. There were 2 altars associated with the Temple of Apollo, and a marble statue base dedicated to the goddess Libya.
Hey!
The civic buildings included a law court complete with an archive library that would have housed legal documents and other papers essential to the city's governance. Traces of fire damage to the building's remains indicate that it was possibly destroyed during the rebellion of the Jewish community in 115 CE.
Άνθρωπε, εν θα δεήστη. Απάντησον μη.
Public baths were common in Roman and Greek cities, and Cyrene held true to this tradition. 2 thermal baths from different eras were discovered among the ruins. An inscription at the entrance of one of the baths is presumed to be attributed to the owner. It dates the building to the Hellenistic period. Mosaics were originally created for practical reasons, the need to waterproof floors. Imported by Greeks in Egypt and Cyrenaica, the designs represented either scenes from daily life, marine fauna, or mythological figures. In addition to traditional Greek motifs, they also integrated concepts specific to Egyptian culture, such as the Nelumbo. The best examples of mosaics recovered to date, however, come from Alexandria. The Cyrene baths were fitted into an underground tomb dated somewhere between the 8th and 6th century BCE. Bath seats were carved directly in the rock, allowing for more comfortable ablutions. As with many of the public buildings, the thermal baths were elaborately decorated. Statues such as Aphrodite and Eros the Archer were discovered within. The Frigidarium, a pool of cold water, was the first room visitors entered. It was followed by the Tepidarium, or tepid water area, and then the hot water room called the Caldarium. Water for the thermal baths was sourced from a natural spring. Burning stones were deposited into the water to create steam as required. The flowing water of the spring ended in a cistern and fountain referred to as the Aqua Augusta. Later Roman baths were built under Emperor Trajan and then restored under Hadrian. After the earthquake of 365 CE, they were replaced by baths of Byzantine design, with stones from the old thermal baths used in the reconstruction. The team relied on documentation describing the baths built under Trajan in order to create the location available in the game.
Welcome to the Acropolis of Cyrene. Located on the western edge of the city, Cyrene's Acropolis was smaller than the one in Athens, though its high vantage point provided protection for the city. At its entrance was a single door, flanked by two towers. An inscription, legible to this day, states that the walls and the citadel were restored in the time of Augustus. A number of statuettes have been excavated from the site, including one of Berenice, the daughter of Magus, the king of Cyrene, and half-brother of Ptolemy II. At the northeast tower, there is a sanctuary consisting of two small temples with a vestibule, and an altar believed to be that of Serapis and Isis. When the temples were excavated, archaeologists found traces of fire damage. However, there are no indications as to when this fire occurred. In the 20th century, a fortification was built above the ward to defend against an invading army. It covered the ancient remains of nearby Roman houses entirely, and archaeologists have yet to fully excavate them.
παρασκευαίος κέλευμαν υπονφορίας αρχής προς πάντες ισχυτοδέψεων. Χρήζεται γάρου τιδήποτε σταθμαίων σκήτου κριτώνος δια παντευτίας Παρασκευήν. Όνιον γε διαθεσιμένων διήν ταλάντων επιστάθμεων.
Welcome to Amulets and Rituals. Ancient Egyptians believed the world was a chaotic place, filled with supernatural forces. They knew that art and words gave life and power to things. Carved with images from hieroglyphs or in the shapes of gods, amulets were highly personal objects that warded off dangers and disease while attracting success. Some amulets were temporary, intended to solve a specific problem, while others were meant to be worn forever into the afterlife. Priests would infuse amulets with magical energy during religious ceremonies, imbuing them with protective magic to safeguard against supernatural powers. The wealthiest of Egyptians could obtain a divinely ordained pendant in which was hidden a magic formula inscribed on a piece of papyrus. It would act as a unique spell tailored to the owner. Religion was so important to ancient Egyptians that it permeated every aspect of their daily lives. Since water was the source of life and had the symbolism of purifying the body and the soul, all daily routines began with ablutions. Personal prayers to the gods were sometimes written or spoken, with family prayers passed down through generations. There was a complete calendar of each of the religious days, both good and bad, illustrating the appropriate daily rituals. Along with wine, milk, and ointments, offerings to the gods consisted of small amulets to life-size statues and family shrines. During the Greco-Roman period, offerings to the gods consisted of mummified animals, cats for Bastet, dogs for Anubis, and birds for Thoth. Deemed messengers of the gods, oracles offered guidance and judgment for all Egyptians, regardless of status. Crucial advice was offered on everything from day-to-day farming management to a pharaoh's decision on whether to start a war. Oracles were often used to decide legal issues. If the accused refused the judgment of the god, another god could be consulted in hopes of a more favorable reply. It was oracles that guided the Greek sailor Batos to the coast of Libya, where he founded a colony known as Cyrene. During Alexander the Great's campaign to conquer Persia, he consulted the oracle at the Temple of Amun within the oasis of Siwa, and was subsequently ordained a divine being.
Welcome to Crucifixion. In terms of the severity of Roman justice, crucifixion was at the top of the list of corporal punishment, followed by death by fire and decapitation. The upper class considered crucifixion unworthy of their position. Those lucky enough to have Roman citizenship were also exempt from such treatment. Easily accessible, crucifixions were popular entertainment among the citizenry. Unlike throwing victims to wild animals, which required an arena, crucifixions did not require any particular setting. Those subjected to crucifixion were almost always slaves, traitors, and lower-class citizens. Roman deserters were crucified because the betrayal of the soldiers was perceived as endangering the lives of Roman citizens. In 71 BCE, a major slave uprising in Italia was repressed by the Roman army. This resulted in the crucifixion of 6,000 men, including their leader, a slave and former gladiator known as Spartacus.
Welcome to Roman aqueducts. Water management was taken seriously by the Romans. Cyrenaica benefited greatly from Roman administration with the construction of aqueducts and canals. The source of water varied depending on the location. Many aqueducts were built at the foot of the mountains, offering greater flow from the melting snow. The ability to transport water over a greater distance increased agricultural production. Some aqueducts were reported to be over 7 kilometers in length. Where the Greeks of Libya originally focused mainly on olive trees and figs, which required less water, the advent of Roman aqueducts allowed for a far greater crop diversity. Every farm's water use was carefully scheduled. The engineering methods used to create aqueducts were constantly reviewed, with a clear focus on exploiting the local environment. Materials, water usage, cleaning regulations, and a deep understanding of how to exploit gravity itself were all important concerns. Several fortresses were built to protect the aqueducts, basins, and cisterns. Additional water was collected with wells and cisterns, but aqueducts were the main supply of fresh water. The water was distributed based on the collective needs of the city, before the private needs of an individual. Almost all aqueducts ended in a fountain where the water circulated to clean the streets and supply bathhouses and latrines, thus improving the cleanliness of Cyrenaica's cities. Welcome to the Forts of Cyrenaica. Cyrenaica was a Libyan region under Roman control, gifted to Rome by one of Cleopatra's ancestors. The remains and foundations of ancient fortifications were discovered in the 19th century in the southwest of Cyrenaica, as well as a Roman garrison dating back to the 1st century CE. Evidence shows that these forts were of Libyan origin, rebuilt and modified by Roman engineers when Cyrenaica was part of the empire. Stone was the most commonly used material to build forts in Egypt and Cyrenaica. Though no real proof of a fortress similar to the one before you has been uncovered in that region, the team chose to add it as a worthy and awe-inspiring end-of-game challenge for the player. The forts of Cyrenaica were intended to prevent invaders from gaining access to the main route that led to the country's 5 most important cities. These forts were built close to coastal plains and deserts for added defense. 3 of these cities were recreated by the team: Balagrae, Apollonia, and Cyrene. Had it existed, the fort before you would have protected the road leading to Balagrae. Other than reference to an attack around 404 CE and a military reorganization by Emperor Justinian during the 6th century CE, we still know little of the Roman military presence in Cyrenaica.
Welcome to Roman military equipment. The strength of Rome was directly dependent on its military supremacy and fundamentally militaristic society. regular citizens, comprised mostly of farmers and herders, joined to protect their land and families. In return for their service, members of this civic army were allowed to vote. Trained to be highly disciplined and obedient to superior officers, citizen soldiers developed a deep sense of loyalty to their city. The quality of the armor of a Roman foot soldier was intrinsically linked to his social status and wealth. Chainmail was the most commonly used type of armor. Scale armor, made famous in today's media, came into use after Caesar's time. Foot soldiers carried large and oblong shields, while the cavalry used smaller ones of Greek origin. Soldiers were expected to carry their own kit, including the tools required for the construction of forts and tents. Roman soldiers used the same types of weapons. The stomach and face were the most targeted parts of the body. As such, a legionary was equipped with two close combat weapons, a dagger and a short sword, known as a gladius. One of the most ingenious Roman weapons was the javelin. Its pyramid-shaped tip pierced the body, while its iron shank was designed to break upon impact, stopping the enemy from throwing it back. During their conquests, the Romans regularly transformed enemy technologies to add to their own formidable arsenal. After capturing a Carthaginian vessel, the Romans adopted its better features and constructed a superior fleet of ships. Adapting heavy artillery designs from Greek models aided the Romans in building catapults and ballistae. The latter became an iconic symbol of Roman warfare. Welcome to Osiris, the first mummy. The oldest mummies recovered date from the Old Kingdom, though Egyptologists believe that mummification was in use much earlier than that. At first, the body was mummified through environmental desiccation, by leveraging the dryness of the environment and the heat of the climate. Early experimentations in mummification were conducted with the use of resin made from tree sap. Strips of linen were only used on some superficial parts of the epidermis of the hands or jaw. Ideologically, the will to preserve the body is not explained in any way until 3600 BCE. This is when the Egyptian belief that the body housed the soul was finally documented for modern Egyptologists to eventually decipher. It was not until the arrival of the myth of Osiris in the Egyptian religion around the 5th dynasty that mummification was thoroughly conceptualized. The practice was thereafter grounded in both a mythological and ideological point of view. Osiris was mainly known as the god of the dead and the god of resurrection. The most well-known Genesis myth concerning Osiris is that of his dismemberment. It is Plutarch who gives the most simplified and complete summary of the story. Within Egyptian mythology, Osiris represented the first king to rule Egypt. Jealous of his power, his brother Seth attempted to usurp his throne. After several unsuccessful attempts, Seth succeeded in killing his brother by dismembering him and scattering the pieces of his body all over Egypt. Isis, the great of magic, traveled all over Egypt in search of the pieces of her husband's body. After a long search, she recovered all the pieces save for his manhood, as it was eaten by a fish. Isis then reassembled the body of her husband by binding it together with strips of linen. Aided by her sister Nephthys, another powerful magician, they gave Osiris the breath of life. This not only brought him back from the dead, but also allowed him to recover his virility long enough to impregnate Isis, thus ensuring his succession before, once more, dying. Thus Horus was born. The ritual used to bring Osiris back to life essentially depicts how he became the first mummy. It is why, on the sarcophagi of kings, we often find Isis and Nephthys represented as the magicians who restore life to the deceased.
Don't forget, you can still use photo mode at any time. Welcome to Ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphics were used as sacred writing, appearing on monuments, statues, and sacred papyrus texts. The earliest symbols that resemble hieroglyphs were on pottery dating back to 4000 BCE. This stylized form of signs and drawings was the only writing used from its ancient origins to the end of pharaonic history. Ancient Egyptians referred to hieroglyphs as the writing of the gods. Considered a difficult language, it was intended for pharaohs, nobility, and priests, and meant to be used in ceremonies, within tombs, and for government records. Since few Egyptians were able to read the ancient hieroglyphs, the mythological aura around the language was persistent, even in their own culture. The structure of hieroglyphs offers insight into Egyptian culture, not just in what the translations say, but in the structure of the symbols themselves. They were found on tomb walls, on sarcophagi, on statues, and on pottery, and were meticulously recorded in countless ancient papyri. In many temples, priests would perform rituals and daily offerings. These were accompanied by hieroglyphs used as spells. In tomb paintings, the hieroglyphs are represented with formulas to recite. These spoken words were meant to be spells which would allow the deceased to benefit from the offerings for all eternity. Spells and offerings were also written for the living, to enhance medicines and cure illnesses. The most famous of ancient Egyptian documents is the Book of the Dead. Written in hieroglyphs and hieratic texts, it depicts important spells and rituals. These spells were intended to ensure a smooth transition from life to death and allow the deceased to safely navigate the perils of the afterlife. Even after it was deciphered, the reading of hieroglyphs remained difficult at times due to the many directions in which they can be read. Depending on the orientation of the signs, hieroglyphs can be read left to right, right to left, horizontally or vertically, though never bottom to top. A clue on which way to read is to first notice which direction the figurative signs are facing. If a pictogram is looking to the right, then the reader is meant to start from the right and read towards the figure. Column text on a papyrus begins from the right, then goes top to bottom for each column. Text written on tomb walls resembles the structure of a page from a comic book. The text can be placed in front, behind, or above the character, and its symbols look in the same direction as the character. Another clue is that the name of a god or hieroglyphs meaning gods or kings are always written before the descriptive text. Compared to alphabetical languages, Egyptian hieroglyphs have more symbols. Confronted with the absence of vowels, the Egyptians invented a category of signs. When placed at the end of words, these signs help inform its meaning. For instance, a drawing of a lion will refer to a lion and also relate to the abstract concept of a lion as something dangerous or powerful. Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs contained a little more than 700 signs. By the end of the Greco-Roman period, there were 10,000 signs. Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner created a list classifying common hieroglyphic signs and their variants. Ancient Egyptian languages have many similarities with Asian and African languages. They have evolved in similar ways to the various forms of written Egyptian. These languages belong to the Hamito-Semitic group. There were 5 clear evolutions in the Egyptian language, each with their own distinctive structure. These languages are known as Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, and Coptic. Coptic is the only living language that allows linguists to define the vowel structure and to distinguish different dialects. While hieroglyphs and hieratic script give us an idea as to how the ancient Egyptian language was structured and written, the way it was spoken is still up for debate. The team opted for English as the spoken language, with the characters using ancient Egyptian and Greek words and accents. The language that is spoken in the background by the crowds is largely based on Sir Alan Gardner's Egyptian grammar. To help resurrect a dead language, we consulted Egyptologists and dialogue coaches to establish our target sound and cast actors with Arabic, Hebraic, and African backgrounds to bring the game to life. After Alexander the Great's arrival in Egypt and the establishment of his reign, Greek became the language used by the governing bodies. The inability to read hieroglyphs caused resentment among the Greek population. It's from this tension that the Rosetta Stone was created. The spread of Christianity ended pharaonic culture and resulted in the destruction of its pagan monuments. This also marked the end of hieroglyphic writing and understanding.
Welcome to Ancient Egyptian Medicine. Evidence of advanced medical procedures have been found on mummies, and ancient Egyptians left detailed medical writings from diagnosis to follow-up treatment. One of the oldest known surgical studies is the Edwin Smith Papyrus. It's one of the first documents in history that notes an association between the integrity of the brain and cognitive functions, including cases of ocular complications and paralysis following head trauma. Vinegar-treated marble stone from Memphis was used as an anesthetic. Another similar document, the Ebers Medical Papyrus, is over 20 meters long and 30 centimeters wide. It details treatments of 48 surgical cases and contains 877 paragraphs describing various diseases. Alongside accurate and factual scientific approaches, the papyrus has more than 700 magic formulas and incantations to ward off demons and disease. This demonstrates how ancient Egyptians believed in a harmonious balance between religion and science. Remedies were considered as medicine and carried by doctors and priests. Village doctors often had another job alongside their medical duties and the preparation of medicines. A cure for blindness was made of fermented honey, ochre, and coal. The science behind it was that honey functioned as an antiseptic and antibacterial, while ochre would reduce the swelling. All of their knowledge did not always suffice. Ramses II died of an infection caused by an abscessed tooth.
Welcome to Siwa.
See you here then.
The Siwa Oasis is in the western desert of Egypt. Geographically, the Siwan Oasis is located in a depression 20 meters below sea level. Its natural springs and warm climate aided in the bountiful production of date trees. Though clearly influenced to some degree by Egyptian and African culture, the area's isolation resulted in a unique society and language. While they worshipped the same deities, Siwan temple architecture differed from traditional Egyptian temples. Old Kingdom Egyptians referred to the oasis as cauldron, due to its unique geographical structure. Oases were crucial for nomadic tribes and caravans. Without them, there was no chance of survival in an otherwise harsh landscape. As such, oases quickly became hubs for trade, as well as areas of political control. Because of the dry climate, there is very little rainfall to sustain the oases. Instead, underground rivers flood the natural basins. Since many oases have a north-south orientation parallel to the Nile, some geologists suggest they were once tributaries of the mighty river. There is evidence that ancient Egyptians attempted to create some oases. The Libyan oases are the best known, as they are geographically and culturally linked to the Nile Valley and the Delta. These western oases have a distinct geology from the other regions of Egypt. The most famous and important oases are Karga, Dakhla, Farafra, Baharia, and Siwa. The Spring of the Sun is one of many thermal sources in Siwa, with the particularity that Cleopatra would have bathed in this one, giving it its name. The presence of the source beneath was attested already by Herodotus during the 5th century BCE, when the oasis was called Amuneion by the Greeks of Cyrene. Oracles predicted the future, delivered omens that could be more or less obscure, and offered divine guidance. The Siwan oracle was considered one of the 3 greatest of the ancient world, alongside the oracles of Delphi and Dodoni. Because of the Greek colonies in Cyrenaica, the temple associated Zeus with the worship of Ammon. It is no wonder that Alexander the Great made the perilous journey to Siwa in order to consult the oracle, emulating the actions of mythical heroes such as Hercules and Perseus. This action earned the approval of the oracle, who validated his claim as Pharaoh of Egypt. He was confirmed as the son of Ammon, conferring upon him the most legitimate claim to date of all Egypt's foreign invaders. The powerful and the rich would send gifts or travel great distances in order to ensure their good fortune by gaining the blessing of the Oracle of Siwa. Every successful blessing only increased the soothsayer's prestige. Runner Eubotus, a famous citizen of Cyrene, consulted the oracle in order to know if he would win the 93rd Olympic Games race in 408 BCE. He did, enhancing the standing of the Siwan oracle in the process. The Temple of the Oracle of Ammon was built in the 6th century BCE by Pharaoh Amasis. In the game, its entrance is guarded by ram-headed sphinxes, the animal representing Ammon. They were inspired by similar statuary located at the British Museum. Another option would have a Greek-influenced representation of Zeus Ammon, a human-headed sphinx with horns. This representation of Zeus Ammon was very popular in Siwa.